Let me preface everything this morning with the knowledge that I have that what I'm chewing on today, that what I've been chewing on the past couple of years, or maybe for a lifetime. But what I've been thinking, what I might talk about, I recognize is nothing new. I'm not bringing any new, fresh perspective, any new, brilliant, new insights. It's just some thoughts as I'm sitting here on this log tree that I sit on a lot of times here in the woods. So a couple of weeks ago, I talked about this being my Sunday morning cathedral sanctuary, and this is the pew that I often sit on and reflect about. So if church, if the purpose of church now, and I'm not really totally sure what the purpose of church is from a scholarly perspective, so this is from a guy who sits in the pew, who grew up not on the fringes but deeply embedded in the institution of church, very much on the inside, and as Richard Rohr says, sometimes on the edge of the inside, but definitely on the inside. Grew up in that environment. Spent a good number of years in pastoral work or in church denominational headquarters type of work, or working at ministry producing higher education institutions, so to speak. So, been around that a lot. Last couple of years, not so much. But like I say, from a just a laity perspective, my perception is that the purpose of church is ultimately to nurture, encourage, inspire, challenge, convict people to walk in the way of Jesus, in the kingdom of God, to help bring about the dream that was in the Garden of Eden. So if that's the purpose of church, so you would extend that means helping people feel maybe more connected to the divine dream, and more connected to a community of people that encourage and nurture and challenge and convict us to live more in the way of Jesus or the kingdom of God. Then, as I reflect on what I experienced yesterday being a Sunday, I walked in the woods for a bit Sunday morning with the dogs, and then I gathered with a couple of close friends, and we sat in a coffee shop for a couple of hours. And what I walked away with from that morning was the strong sense of being encouraged, nurtured, challenged, and convicted to continue to try to live in the way of Jesus. I was brought to a place where both head and heart thought more about the way of Jesus and the kingdom of God. And I also experienced the opportunity to sit with two friends as we shared pretty deeply about some of the pain, some of the challenge of just trying to be alive today and trying to figure out what it means to be alive and not just be selfish bastards. So I would say I experienced what church is supposed to be about yesterday. At the same time, to get to the woods and to get to the meeting with my friends, I drove past probably a half a dozen different church parking lots as cars were gathering. With the cars, people are gathering. And I felt a kind of a rising angst of I didn't want to go into those buildings. I wondered why people were going to those buildings, what people would be experiencing as far as the way of Jesus and the kingdom of God in those buildings. At one point, for about 6 or 7 blocks, driving along, I drove beside a truck hauling a trailer, obviously on its way to set up at a local church. And the truck had a really big Jesus on the side of it. And again, I found this kind of angst. It's not that I'm opposed to Jesus or in any way, shape, or form. I very much embrace the teachings of Jesus, not as a saint, more as a seeker and a scallywag and an occasional saint. But I was drawn to the angst that I felt from kind of the institution, and not totally sure what to do with that. Was drawn to the idea that I seem to hear more and more people moving away from the church, people saying, I don't want to, it doesn't work for me, and yet those same people being very drawn to the way of Jesus and to the kingdom of God. And so it's a bit troubling when I am more inspired by listening to Don Lemon on CNN talk about Jesus than I am to oftentimes, when I think back to the past, to what I experienced sitting in the confines of a sanctuary, oftentimes on staff, and not feeling necessarily the same conviction and encouragement to live in the way of Jesus as I do when I listen to Stephen Colbert talk about Jesus, or like I say, Don Lemon talk about Jesus. Just a couple of examples. So anyways, just some thoughts about that. Questions more than thoughts. But yeah, that's what I'm thinking about this morning.